Julia, let me begin with you and your reporting on what you saw on Russian television. How much of a change is this? Were some of these pundits the people who were saying before the war started that Russia could do this in 3 days?
At least one of them was Bagdasarov, one of the experts that spoke out in favor of ending the conflict, the sooner the better. So it was a very radical change either way, and they're taking quite a risk speaking out that way.
Michael, you served as the sort of punching bag of some of these pundits on Russian television, there to give the view that they could then try to knock down. And you know some of them. What do you make of what they were saying last night?
So I was the punching bag, but I also punched back. And people like me are the people who have disappeared from these shows over the past few weeks. So 3 weeks ago, I could have gone on and said exactly what Karen said, and I would have been yelled at for it, but I would have been able to say it. The fact that it's a big deal that someone is able to say it for 30 seconds on Russian TV now shows just how much things have changed. They are really nervous about controlling this message, and so they are really clamping down on anybody saying anything that doesn't fit the party line.
And Molly, what are you finding? You just left Moscow recently. I'm sorry. You were in Moscow on a journalistic program, working in Moscow, just kind of getting started. Had your hopes of spending a year there. Had to leave very quickly. What are you hearing about what's happening now in the control of information there?
So it's been interesting because at first when things broke out, there was a fairly free flow of information. Obviously, there was Russian state control over things like the television channels. But recently, I've had people even messaging me on Instagram who I know are opposed to the war efforts, who are seeing me post things like the New York Times reporting on the bombing of the maternity hospital in Mariupol. And they're saying, I heard that this was fake news. I think that the landscape has absolutely changed. You're seeing former independent news outlets like the Echo of Moscow and Doj being shut down. You see other independent news stations pulling their reporters out of Russia. It's becoming harder and harder to get good information about the conflict in Ukraine right now.
And Molly, what did you find about how the protests are organized, or whether they're generated spontaneously now that there isn't a real leadership structure for protests?
Yeah, both protesters I talked to and people who were involved in helping those protesters once they had been detained are saying that what's happening is really unique. I think some people would be surprised to hear that these are some of the most arrests, indicating that these are some of the biggest protests that have happened in Russia. Because if you see the images, they don't look nearly as large as the protests for Navalny about a year ago or the protests in Bolotnaya Square in 2011. These are spontaneous, these are decentralized, these are being organized over Telegram channels, and people are having to come up with techniques to basically evade the crackdown on the right to assembly in Russia.
And Michael, what do you make of what those Russian pundits were saying last night, and the fact that they weren't? It doesn't sound like they were doing the cheerleading in the way that Vladimir Putin would want.
So my expectation is that those pundits who were not doing the cheerleading the way Vladimir Putin would want will not be invited back on those shows. Like I said, 3 weeks ago, I would get invitations to go on shows like that essentially every day. People like me have been excluded for a reason. I see a lot of people still on these shows who I know, and I know why they're there. They have completely eliminated anybody who dissents, and I think that Karen Chaknazarov, who dissented just a little bit, will soon disappear from TV screens in Russia.
And Julia, what is your assessment of where the propaganda wall is now? Is it stronger than it was before this war started in Ukraine? Are there cracks in it? What is happening to it?
The propaganda wall is higher than ever, but I think it will cause the opposite effect because people will start wondering why things have changed so drastically, not only in terms of the economic downfall Russia is facing, but also why all of a sudden all of these alternative sources are not available. And having grown up in the Soviet Union, I know things like that made us wonder more about what they were hiding. So I think that that will be the actual effect of what Putin will achieve, exactly the opposite of from what he's trying to accomplish.
But Julia, when they wonder, when they're getting this one-note story, what can they do to find other information now?
They still have access to the internet, and they could do what other brave Russians are doing, and that is risking their lives and their freedom to protest. And with time, there will be more of them to make a difference. And for now, they still have a way to find that information. And there are outlets that are continuing to broadcast in Russian in spite of facing fines and penalties and bans. And I think it will make a paramount difference.
Molly, what did you discover in your reporting about how people are communicating and how they're getting information despite the propaganda wall?
People are very active on Telegram channels. They're sharing news with each other. A lot of times they'll start up a private channel so that it doesn't get subject to censorship. And then if that one's infiltrated by the authorities, they'll shut that one down and start a new one. This is very spontaneous and kind of happening person to person. And people are still also using VPNs, even though there's been attempts to shut those down. Some are still working. And so people will use VPNs to access things like Twitter and Facebook that the authorities have restricted access to.
Michael, we saw President Zelensky today, once again, in a statement, do it twice. And the second version was in Russian, and he was directing it directly to Russian troops and the Russian people about these attacks on a hospital, for example. How much of that will get through?
A very minimal amount. The people who Molly's describing, who are following Telegram and who are following alternative sources using a VPN, they will see it. The problem is they're a small minority. Some of them will go out on the streets. It won't be enough. Some of them will emigrate. It will be detrimental to the Russian economy. But this situation in which the Kremlin essentially completely controls propaganda, essentially completely controls information, can continue for years. I agree that it is an unstable system. Up until now, they at least had the illusion of free speech. That illusion is gone. But they can maintain this for longer than you would expect they will be able to.
Julia Davis, what about word of mouth? What about the person who is, using the sources that Molly talks about, but then tells other people who don't have access to that? That must be a difficult discussion because it'd be kind of hard to prove to that person that President Zelensky said this or that, what the real truth is.
It is very difficult, but I think that when they realize the magnitude of what has changed in their society and in their life, they will realize that that comports with the magnitude of what Putin has done, and they're on this sinking ship with him. And I believe that it's only a matter of time before they start understanding that the propaganda is only that and start realizing the reality, the ugly reality of Putin's war in Ukraine. Interpersonal communication will mean a lot, especially since Russia and Ukraine have so many links, and they will break through.